Good afternoon and welcome to the IFI Virtual Kitchen. I'm Karen Mack and I'm Associate Staff with International Friendships. I went to Ohio State many moons ago, graduated with my degree in pharmacy, and I'm a pharmacist at a local hospital. And this is my friend.
Hello, my name is Nora and I am a sophomore at The Ohio State University. I am studying computer science.
Well, welcome. Well, I have a couple slides that I'd like to share with you with this, which is a little bit about the history of lasagna. So I have my assistant, Bob, who's going to switch and share our screen. Okay, next slide. So today we're going to be making lasagna, and we're going to talk a little bit about lasagna's history facts. So where do you think that lasagna has originated? Also, if you have questions or you cannot hear us, please put a message in the chat so we can see that, and we will try to answer those questions as well. So where did lasagna originate? Please answer in the chat. Do you think it's Italy, B, USA, C, China, or D, Greece? Well, the answer, drum roll, is Greece. I also thought it started in Italy, but actually it started in Greece. Next slide. So lasagna, or lasagna, is derived from the Greek word laganon, which is the first known form of pasta. Laganon is used to describe flat dough that was sliced into strips. So there are two main types of lasagna noodles. In the US and in southern Italy, we use rippled needles. In Italy, the northern part of Italy, they use flat noodles. So after this class, you will be ready for July 29th, which is actually National Lasagna Day. So thanks for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. So because the meat takes the longest, we're going to get started on that first. We're going to use a frying pan. And I know it says a half teaspoon of salt. I actually don't measure. I just want to put salt to flavor my meat. So while it's cooking, it's absorbing the salt to give flavor. And then with the meat, now actually whenever you start cooking, you always want to wash your hands with soap and water. That's really important so that you don't contaminate your food and anybody else that's eating it. We've already done that before we started. So we're going to go on to our meat. So I'm using organic ground beef. When you're handling meat, especially when it's raw, you do need to make sure that if you have any drips or things like that, that you clean that up with a disinfecting cloth, just because raw meat carries bacteria. So the other thing we're going to add to this is our onion, which we've already chopped. You want to go ahead and add that into the skillet. And we're going to put this back on the stove to cook while we're making the bread. So if you were making this along with us, you're going to want to do that as well. So we're going to put this on the on the stove. We'll use a pancake turner to break it down. We want to break the meat into very small pieces so that it'll cook thoroughly. So Nora, if you want to break this down into smaller pieces, that'd be great. So on the recipe, it says that we can use either Italian sausage or we can use ground beef. I choose to use a higher grade of ground beef because that's what my mom did. It's really about personal preference. You can use Italian sausage, and there's mild all the way up to spicy. It really depends on what your flavor tastes are. The higher percent of meat, if you have, this meat is 85% ground beef and 15% fat. So therefore, it's not going to have a lot of fat in the pan to drain off. But if I have a high, like a lower, like say maybe a 70-30, that means I'm going to have grease in my pan that I'm going to want to drain off. And the way we do that is I actually just take a paper towel and I dab the grease out of the pan and throw away the paper towel. So I'm going to clean my area with a disinfectant wipe because we had meat here. And we're going to make the garlic bread while we're waiting. So how we do that is I have a loaf of bread. This is Italian bread. It's usually on sale at Kroger's for $1. I'm going to slice it in half here, and then I'm going to have Nora demonstrate how she slices it further. So I have a bread knife. A bread knife is a serrated knife. If I would use a flat-edged knife, it doesn't cut very well, and the bread is going to crumble and squish. So you want to use a serrated knife when you're cutting bread. So I'm going to cut the bread in half. This will allow us to make more pieces. Then we're going to butter the bread. Okay, so Nora, if I can have you cut this in half and then in quarters, that will be great. Have you ever made homemade garlic bread before?
I haven't.
Okay, have you ever eaten garlic bread before?
Yes.
Okay.
In the restaurants.
Yeah.
Yes.
So do you like garlic bread?
I do.
Wonderful. So this is an easy way to learn to do this at home. It's very inexpensive. The other thing that we need is a cookie sheet. So a cookie sheet is something that has edges on it. You can make cookies. I put foil or parchment paper down, and this is totally for, I don't want to clean up a big mess. So when I'm done cooking, or baking, I just pull it out and throw it away, and my pan isn't as hard to clean. So what we'll do is I'm going to have you lay these pieces here out, and if you can lay them all out, then we're going to butter. Actually, wanted to step back. If you have foil, that would be something good to put in your pan. Another thing you could use is called parchment paper. If you notice, it's just a very thin paper. You can actually get it at the dollar store. I've seen it there, or you can get it wherever they have like bags, napkins, things like that at the grocery store. This is typically used for baking, so I could use it for baking the bread, or I could use it for making cookies like it's on the box. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to butter the bread, or actually Nora is going to, and what you want to do is just you want to have your butter be soft. You're just going to really generously butter the bread. That's going to hold our salt on. Okay.
We have a question. Does the parchment paper burn in the oven?
So the question is, does parchment paper burn in the oven? As long as the parchment paper is laying flat and you're using the baking mode of your oven, it does not burn. You cannot use wax paper. It actually will burn in the oven. So parchment paper is okay to use in the oven as long as it's flat and you're using the baking button on your oven. You cannot broil with it. That was a great question. Thanks. I'm going to check the meat while Nora is continuing to butter the bread. And I am just breaking down the meat into smaller pieces. So the meat probably takes the longest part of making lasagna, the no-boil method. Just gonna flip over the meat. I want to make sure that I get rid of all of the pink. And I'll show you when it's done cooking, I'll show you what it looks like. Okay. All right, that's looking great. We just have a couple more pieces. So garlic bread, you can also add cheese. We're going to be putting Parmesan cheese. Parmesan is a hard cheese, which means that it's been aged, and there's either soft cheese or hard cheese, and that cheese is hard has been aged longer. I also have Italian cheese, which this is in the refrigerator section. It is a soft cheese, and we'll be using that in our lasagna. You also could put this on top of your bread if you wanted, in place of the Parmesan cheese. Parmesan cheese has kind of a like a little bit of a sour taste. It kind of adds a little zing to your bread. We're going to be using garlic salt, and there is also garlic powder. You could use that, but the garlic salt The salt in it actually gives more flavor to the bread itself, so I prefer to use garlic salt. You can also use garlic. If you have fresh garlic that's been minced up, which means to cut into little pieces, you can actually put that on your bread as well. So what we're gonna do, there is a little section on my garlic bread that has holes in it, so I can sprinkle the salt on. You wanna do this, you don't wanna put lots on, so not generously, but just a small amount, just to give flavor to your bread. So I'm gonna do this. And you can hear a little bit of that going on the foil. So did you see how I did that, Nora? Okay, Nora, let's have you take over. And then we're gonna put Parmesan cheese. Now this cooks at a different temperature than, or this bakes at a different temperature than your lasagna, and it only takes 5 to 10 minutes most. So you don't wanna put this in right away. You would want to bake your lasagna first. And while your lasagna is cooling off for 15 minutes, then you'd put this in so that your bread and your lasagna would be ready at the same time. Okay. And how's our meat coming back here? Very good. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and start with our lasagna. I'm gonna move this back here. So we have, this is a 9 by 13 pan. That means it's 9 inches, 9 inches by 13. This is not an actual lasagna pan. This is considered a casserole pan. So if you have lasagna pan, it's actually taller. Let's take a look at the noodles. So remember, in America, we like to use the rippled lasagna noodles. These are not baked, or sorry, these are not cooked. There are also oven-ready lasagna. And in this box, you'll see that these are flat noodles, and it also is much smaller than the other lasagna. These are like twice as expensive because they've done part of the work. So these are flat noodles, and these are rippled noodles. But if you notice, they're a lot different in size. So I'm gonna get a bigger lasagna out of this. And I can make this a non-boil lasagna by adding extra sauce and baking a little bit longer. And this is half the price of this already oven-ready lasagna noodle. I wanted to also show you a couple other noodles because there's so many different noodles that you can get. So there's mini penna. They look like this, or you can see on the box, they're just very small cut noodles. You can boil these and put sauce over them, or you can bake them. I have, these are called cavatelli, and they're like little small shells. These, a lot of times, you would make like a macaroni salad with it, or sometimes you could cook it and put a sauce over it as well. That's the cool thing about the different noodles. So I couldn't make lasagna out of these kind of noodles. I need to have a flat, because remember, lasagna is about layers. However, I can use some of these same ingredients that we're using to make another Italian dish. This is rotini, and it's a curled noodle. So when you put this in the water and boil it for the time that's on the box, it will expand, it'll almost double in size. So when you're trying to figure out how much to make, there are directions on the box, but also remember that it's going to expand. Here's the macaroni and cheese. This is an American kid favorite. These are elbow macaroni, which look like this. And you can get the different noodles either made with whole grain, or you can actually get vegetable ones, and they also come as gluten-free. Okay, how's our meat coming here? Okay, great, almost done. All right, we're gonna go ahead and start with making our lasagna. So the first thing you wanna do is you wanna spray your pan with oil. If you don't have a spray oil, what you can do is put a little bit of oil in, take a brush and make sure you cover all the edges, or you could use a paper towel. The big thing is we're adding the oil so that the lasagna doesn't stick so much and we don't have so much of a cleanup.
I have
So-
another question.
Okay.
Does every lasagna have the same layers in it?
The question is, does every lasagna have the same layers in it? And the answer is no. Everybody individualizes them. Because as I was saying, you could do Italian sausage instead of beef. You could actually slice zucchini very, very thin and use that in place of lasagna noodles if you wanted a noodle-free lasagna. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray this. And then Nora is gonna add our sauce. So Nora, have you ever made lasagna before?
I have not.
Okay. Have you ever eaten lasagna?
I have bought the frozen ones,
Okay.
and they actually taste pretty good.
Okay. Wonderful. So what is it about lasagna that you like?
It's about having the meat in it already.
Okay.
Yeah, I just like anything with meat in it.
Okay.
So-
Wonderful. Okay. So we're going to use spaghetti sauce, and you might be asking, what's the difference between spaghetti sauce and pasta sauce? I know that when I go into an Asian market and I look at the noodles, I wonder what's the difference. So you might be overwhelmed when you go into an American grocery store and wonder, why are there so many sauces? Well, they have different ingredients. So this one is tomato basil. So it's a tomato sauce. When making lasagna, you want it to be a tomato base. You can choose it with meat, you can choose it with cheese, you can choose it with mushrooms or vegetables, as long as it's a tomato sauce. So I'm actually gonna, the first layer is actually gonna have sauce on the bottom. Because we're using unbaked noodles, we need to make sure we have plenty of sauce to soften our noodles. All right, so what we're gonna do is start our layers, and Nora, I'm gonna have you do that. So if I can have you remove this. We're gonna layer these in here like this. You're gonna put 4 across, and then we're gonna break a noodle because our pan is shorter than is longer than the shorter noodle. We can actually fill in the sides with extra noodles. All right, if you wanna go ahead and put our noodles in. And I'm gonna check the meat back here. All right, our meat is done. So I'm going to show you what this meat looks like. You can see all the pink is gone, and we have some nice onion in there just to give it good flavor. All right, so our next layer is going to be using the ricotta cheese. Oops. Okay, I'm going to have to wash that. All right, so we're going to use ricotta cheese, and we're going to use half of it in this layer. So ricotta cheese is just a milk product. It's there's Italian variety. I would encourage you to use the Italian variety because it has more flavor. As you see, it's a solid. So what Nora's gonna do is she's gonna take dollops out and put this on our lasagna noodles. And I'm gonna clean this off really quick. So the reason why I recommended an Italian type of ricotta cheese is because it's more flavorful. Some of the store brands aren't as flavorful, not that you can't use them. I would not recommend using cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is too watery and it has curds of the cheese in it. I know that there's some recipes that actually will take cottage cheese and mix it with 2 raw eggs. And what they do is they would blend it with a mixer or a whisk so that it's more fluffy. My mom never did that, so that's not part of my recipe. The other thing you could do is you could hard boil eggs and you can slice them very small and add that to the ricotta cheese. I've seen that as well. That wasn't in my mom's recipe, so that's not how I make it. All right, the next thing we'll do is we're gonna add half of the meat. So I'm gonna hold the pan for Nora, and she's going to spoon half of the meat into the pan. Remember, I didn't have to drain my grease because there's very little fat. Now the higher fat content gives more flavor. Let me get a little bit more in there. gives more flavor to the meat itself. So that's why someone would choose a higher fat content. And so she's spreading that around. What will happen when this is baking is that the ricotta cheese is just gonna melt, and that'll all become one layer, because that's what lasagna is, layers. The next thing we're gonna do is our layer of cheese. So I prefer provolone, but you could use mozzarella. I think that provolone has more flavor. And there's two different kinds of provolone. We have the smoked flavor and non-smoked flavor. And you might be wondering, why would you use one over the other? The smoked flavor just gives a little bit of a smoky tinge to the food. And I like to add one of each because we have two different layers of this. So I'm gonna give Nora the cheese, and she's gonna make another layer of cheese slices, because lasagna is all about layers. As you can see, lasagna isn't that hard to make. It's actually pretty easy when you don't have to cook the noodles. If you choose to do cooking the noodles or boiling them before, what you do is you boil a big pot of water. It has to be at a rolling boil, and then you drop the noodles in until they're cooked for about 8 to 10 minutes and nice and soft. You don't want them too soft though, because you want to be able to pull them out and individually make layers. Okay, so our next layer is going to be sauce, because we're going to be adding more noodles. So if I can have you put our spaghetti sauce here. And as I said, spaghetti and pasta sauce really are the same thing. You don't want to just use tomato sauce though, because it doesn't have any seasonings in it. All right, you can use this to, you need the spatula. All right, just a moment. Sorry about that. This is our first attempt at doing a virtual cooking show. So we're hoping that you're enjoying this and learning some new skills about how to make lasagna. It's maybe a new dish for you. I like lasagna because it's easy, especially if I'm having company over, because once I get this all made, I can put it in the refrigerator, or I can make it even like a week or so before and freeze it. If I choose to make it ahead, I need to make sure that my pan comes to room temperature. The reason why is that if I put a cold glass container, casserole dish, into a hot oven, it will shatter. And all of my hard work will be gone, and I won't have anything to eat. All right, so now we've got our we've got our sauce. We are going to put our next layer of pasta noodles. So we'll find that we will not use all of our lasagna noodles from the box, because our pan is not a lasagna pan. Our pan is just a regular casserole dish, so it's not as deep. And so I just put tape on the end, and I use it for the next time I make lasagna. All right, great. All right, so now we're gonna finish using the ricotta cheese. So Nora's gonna make dollops of that. And are there any questions out there about making lasagna? Okay, please put those in the chat. Also, if you wanted, this makes a really large pan of lasagna. If you want to make less, you can break the noodles in half like Nora did and use it in a smaller pan. Or what you can do is also, you could make 2 lasagnas with the same ingredients and freeze one for a later time. That way, when you are in a hurry, you can pull it out and use that. You would want to, if you have a frozen lasagna, you would want to pull it out the night before in the refrigerator and let it thaw. If it's not completely thawed, as long as the pan is mostly at room temperature, then you can, I would put it into a cold oven, and I would bake it at 350 for an hour or so. Looks like we might have another question.
Yes, we have a question, 2 questions. Does putting the ricotta cheese in dollops as opposed to spreading it make a difference? And then the other question is, how long is lasagna good for after you make it?
Okay, so the first question is whether you need to smooth out the ricotta. You can do that. It's not really going to make a difference, because once it starts baking in the oven, it's going to melt and it will make its own layer. The other question was in regards to how long after I make and cook the lasagna is it good for? I would say Leftovers should be refrigerated as soon as they have cooled off, and put them in the refrigerator right away after they're cool. I would say 2 to 3 days. I would say sometimes they would last all the way up to a week. Health experts might say just 2 to 3 days before you needs to be used up. But I've actually kept mine. I don't use any leftovers in my refrigerator that are more than a week old. So use the smell test. If it smells weird, you always throw it out. But all of these are going to be, all the things are going to be cooked all the way through. So at least 2 to 3 days after you've made it, as long as it's kept cold in the refrigerator. Okay, so now we're ready for our meat. By the way, that was a great question. Thank you for asking. Here we go. Okay. Nora, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
So do you think lasagna is hard to make?
It's much easier than I thought it would be.
What part do you think is the hardest to do?
Getting all the ingredients, I think. Yeah, there's so much.
Okay, so that is something I would recommend, is that when you're starting a recipe, it's always good to get your recipe out, get all of your ingredients out, and then start making the item. The reason why is you don't want to be halfway through something and then realize, oh no, I don't have that ingredient. But if that happens, see if you have a substitute, because recipes, honestly, they're just a suggestion. They're a great starting point, a framework for you to cook. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put one more layer of noodles on, and then we're going to cover this with sauce. Oops, wait a minute. Sorry, I forgot. We have another layer of cheese. All right, so this is the smoked flavored provolone. If you want to just put the noodles back in, there you go. All right. So Americans really like cheese, and the nice thing about putting cheese slices, it's going to make a nice layer of our lasagna, and lasagna is all about layers. The other thing is that lasagna is actually, to me, tastes better the next day. So having leftover lasagna is actually a really yummy thing, because it's all the flavors have melded together, and so it actually can be quite tasty to have it the next day. Another American food like that would be chili. I honestly like chili better the second day than I do the first, because it just allows longer for those melody of the flavors. All right, so one of the problems with our casserole dish is that it's kind of short. So I'm actually, if you run into that, we just kind of push down, and the reason we want to do this is so that our ingredients stay in. So our second to last layer is that we're going to cover, remember, all the noodles need to be covered with pasta sauce. So we're going to have Nora cover that with the sauce. And our last layer is going to be shredded cheese. You can use shredded mozzarella. And that's okay. Don't worry about being messy. It's easy to clean up. We've got paper towels, so don't be concerned about that. It's very easy to clean up. And I told my husband when I married him, I'm a good cook, but I'm a messy cook. So our agreement is that I make the food and he does the dishes, because I don't really like to do dishes. So it works out great. So the Italian cheese that I'm going to use today actually has 5 different cheeses in it. It has mozzarella cheese, it has provolone, Parmesan, Assaggio, and Romano cheeses. So each of those cheeses brings a different flavor to the lasagna. And so that's why I prefer to use the Italian. I also prefer to use the shredded, the very thin, it's fine shredded cheese. So we're going to use this whole pack. So Nora, we're going to have you put that on top of the sauce. And our lasagna will take about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes to bake. It really depends on your oven. So we give you that guideline, but everybody's oven is different. And so it's important to check it definitely after about 45 minutes to see how it's doing. If you notice that it's getting too brown on the top, then you would consider putting foil over top of it, just so that the cheese on top doesn't burn. If you feel that it's doing well, but it's not quite done, and how do you test if a lasagna is done? You would do the knife test. You would actually take a knife and slide it in. If there's a lot of resistance, then you know that it's not done, because you want your noodles to be soft. You don't want them to be al dente. So,
This is a good question.
okay.
Can you use orange cheese on top instead of white cheese?
Okay, so the question is, can you use orange cheese? So orange cheese is cheddar cheese. You could use cheddar cheese on top. It's just, it will taste different. That's not the usual fare, but as I said, lasagna is different for everybody. I have made lasagna with zucchini. I have never made lasagna with cheddar, so it's something that you can, but that's not the usual for making lasagna. But good question. Okay, so our lasagna is all ready. So we're going to put this in the oven and are hoping that the other one that we made a little bit ago is all ready, because we need to let the lasagna sit for about 15 minutes before you cut it. If you pull it out of the oven immediately and cut it, then all of the pasta sauce hasn't had a chance to firm back up. So usually you want it to sit for about 15 minutes before you would serve it to your guests. So I'm going to check this one down here. Oh, it looks great. So I'm going to switch places with this. So one thing when making lasagna, let's wipe this up. I'm going to pull this one out. We put this on a cookie sheet. And the reason we put it on a cookie sheet is that if I have any spillover, if my lasagna decides to bubble over, it's not messing up my oven and making my oven hard to clean. So I'm going to pull this out and sit it here on my hot pads. And this way you can take a look at it. So you see that it's nice and got a nice color here. And I'm going to test to see if those noodles are done, and it's going in very easy. So that means that my noodles are cooked all the way. So I'm going to set this back here. We have to do one more step on our bread before we pop it in the oven. So I'm going to move this back here. We need to put the Parmesan cheese on our bread, which I forgot. So I have Parmesan cheese. It's shredded. You can get this where you get normal shredded cheese. And as I said, that this is a harder cheese, so it has more flavor. And what we're going to do is just take a little bit and sprinkle it on. This then will melt into the bread. So we'll have Nora demonstrate that. As I said, you could use that Italian shredded cheese, the soft cheese, on this as well. You could use the cheddar cheese if you wanted. You could put fresh minced garlic, which means you take a fresh garlic clove and you put it into tiny little pieces. Those are many different things. You could add Italian herbs. So there's many ways that you could make garlic bread. The other thing you could do is you could slice your bread in small slices. And some people, this is done in Italy, is they have a little bowl of olive oil, and it's usually the virgin olive oil because it will have more flavor, and they will add herbs, and they can go ahead and dip their bread into the oil. You could also do oil and balsamic vinegar. Mixing the oil and the balsamic vinegar gives a nice flavor, and you could serve bread like that as well. All right, so this will go in the oven at 400 for about 5 minutes. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cut this, because what cooking show would there be without us getting to taste how yummy our product is? So I'm going to cut a piece of lasagna for each of us so we can try it. So what kind of things did you learn today, Nora?
Lasagna is all about layers.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so it probably needed to sit a little bit longer, but that's hot. So there you go. And so remember I talked about using a serrated knife versus a flat knife? I would cut my lasagna with a serrated knife. I'm sorry, with a flat knife. And I'm just gonna cut it all the way across the pan. So maybe I should bring this over so you can see. There we go. So the longer this sits, the more this will congeal so that it will be easier to cut. Okay. These are not there. There we go. My pan is very hot. But see how I have it on a cookie sheet? That way, if anything boils over, then I will have something to catch it and I won't have as much to clean up. All right, so when I'm cutting my lasagna, I just cut pieces horizontally vertically like this, and then make little squares. Are there any questions out there in the audience? So right now I haven't left it, as I said, I didn't, because of time, I haven't let it set for 15 minutes. But I'm sure that it's going to taste yummy.
Here's another question. Someone was wondering about eggs or pepperoni in their lasagna.
Yes. So yes, you can add eggs. As I said earlier, the one recipe I saw actually takes raw eggs and they whip the eggs and they put the ricotta cheese in and they stir all that up to get a smooth ricotta cheese to be able to make as a layer. I've also seen where people will hard boil eggs and they chop them up and they would put that with the ricotta cheese. And what was the second thing? Oh, pepperoni. Yes, you could do a whole layer of pepperoni in your lasagna. It would be, add a little bit of spice and zing. So yeah, that's an option. As I said, that's the cool thing about lasagna is that you can individualize it to what you like. But you now have the main, a very good recipe to start with, a framework, and then you can build on that. So I would still bake or my bread. Let's see how the bread's doing. Oh, it's not quite done. How I know my bread will be done is that my cheese will be a little bit melty and the edges will be toasted, so they'll be light brown. So it takes about 4 to 6 minutes. I think we're going to go ahead and try a bite of our lasagna because I think it's cooled off. Huh? We're going to wait on that one. All right. So here goes the test. So it's nice and cheesy, and you want it to be cheesy like that. Mmm. Can you hold your plate so they can see the layer of how the ricotta cheese has melted? So it's nice and gooey and yummy. All right, let me check our bread. Oh, it's coming. It's not quite.
Hot.
Is it too hot? All right, so today we've talked about how to make lasagna, and lasagna came from Greece originally. Lasagna, laganon, means flat pieces of dough that have been sliced. So that's exactly what a lasagna noodle is. You learned that in the US and in southern China, they use rippled noodles versus flat noodles. That you learned also the difference between ricotta cheese and cottage cheese. You learned about the different kinds of cheese that you could do slices. You could use mozzarella or you could use the provolone, either smoked or not smoked. You've learned Do I have something hanging from my face?
You're good.
We learned about the importance of adding salt to our skillet when we are frying up our hamburger or our Italian sausage. We learned the importance of good handling of when we use raw meat. We want to make sure that we wash our hands and before and after, or we use a hand sanitizing wipe, because raw meat can carry bacteria and we want to make sure we don't contaminate our other food. If you were going to serve this, traditionally Americans would probably serve this with garlic bread, a salad, maybe a Caesar salad, or maybe a salad with cucumbers. A salad consists of like lettuce, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, things like that, with like an Italian dressing of oil and vinegar. Also maybe a side of green beans, garlic green beans. That would be a traditional, how I would serve this at my home for my family. So let me check the bread. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, so here's our bread. So we've got the cheese has melted a little bit. You could leave it in there a little bit longer, but if you see the cheese is getting a little bit browned and we want the bread to be a little bit toasted. So this would be ready to serve, or you can do it a little bit darker. All right. Looks like we're finishing a little bit early. Is there any other questions that we could answer? I'm actually going to put this back in. I like my bread a little bit more toasted.
There is another question. When did you first make lasagna?
Wow. When did I first learn to make lasagna? Well, I'm going to guess I probably started making this at maybe age 10, because when I was younger, I grew up in the country about 2 hours from Columbus, Ohio, and I'm the youngest of 8 children, so I had to help my mom, and I also was in a 4-H group. 4-H is a kids club that teaches you different skills. So I did an international cooking project, and I probably had made lasagna at that time. Lasagna is good because it can feed a large crowd, and with 10 people in our house, we probably would gobble down or eat the entire casserole because I have 4 brothers. So I think I started probably around the age of 10. But if you have young children at home, you could have them help you by layering the pasta and you doing the rest. Are there any other questions?
Someone else is curious. So how many times do you think you've made lasagna in your life?
How many times, the question is, how many times have I made lasagna in my life? Wow. Well, probably, I would say maybe 100 times, because this is a very common dish and my family really likes this dish and it's easy to make. So that's a good question. So Nora, you've now made it for your first time.
Yeah.
And so we're all ready for July 29th for, I had no idea until I planned for our lasagna making that July 29th is National Lasagna Day. So I encourage you guys on July 29th to make lasagna to celebrate this tradition. All right, well, I know we're finishing early, but we are done. The lasagna is done. This is our first attempt at doing a virtual cooking class. So is there one more question? No? Okay. Thank you guys for joining us. I hope you had fun.